it seems silly to me that if we have to wait around for the next Carl Jung to show up to continue on, then we're going to be waiting for a very, very long time. The more I got familiar with Jung as an individual and his body of work, the more I felt it's outdated. Like, can't we take these ideas and continue on with them? Just because one guy had an idea doesn't mean that we have to just leave those ideas right where they are. Can't we expand? Can't we develop? But if it works, then you'd figure out why it's working, how it's working, and find a way to export it from an individual and import it to other people. And that might not necessarily be rigidly scientific.
All right. So right now we were just talking about, so you said that it's if, looking at journaling, you never really saw it as a way to kind of basically introspect. So I just told you about some different benefits, ways that I've used it. And you related it to introspection. I was curious if you can basically tell me, how do you introspect? What's your process look like? And then we can exchange ideas between, find similarities and find where they differ.
Well, I suspect, so I guess when I look at introspection, and you studied psychology, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you ever started with what was his name, Wilford Wundt, the Wundtian idea of introspection.
No, not familiar.
Oh, so yeah, his idea was much more, uh, I guess, mechanistic, if you will. Um, so how quickly can you record thoughts, or if you poke somebody in the back, how quickly does somebody recognize it and react? So introspection in that regard was very specific. I kind of take a continuation on that of, so if I have external stimuli, how quickly do I notice it subconsciously? And then I try to parse out the way that it's being perceived, the amount of time it took to perceive, uh, and any way it might impact me. So, for example, so I'm outside right now. I've got bugs, birds, cars, um, airplanes. Normally, this doesn't bother me because I'm thinking internally, right? But now I'm having a conversation. And so I have to translate inner thoughts into spoken word. And that's a process within itself, right? Um, but now I have external stimuli getting in the way of that process. So that would be one example of understanding, well, why when I'm alone can I think clearly? I could just tune out the noises, right? Um, but in a circumstance like this, it can have an impact. Not a significant impact, like it's not having a significant impact, but it could. And so it would be in my best interest to think about that and understand kind of the pathways involved with all of that. Um, so, for example, I don't think necessarily verbally, I think kind of conceptually or in image. And so I'm not necessarily thinking about the next word that's coming out of my mouth. I'm thinking about how to capture the concept. And I kind of wrote about this in one of the journal prompts. Um, I suspect the biology of writing uh, bridges a barrier between the central nervous system, so cognition, anything cerebral, to bodily kinesthetic through the actual movements of the fingers typing out the keys. Uh, I don't necessarily think about the words that I'm typing. I'm thinking an idea, and my fingers are programmed on the keyboard, and the words kind of materialize. So it's a synthesis between um, being completely cerebral and utilizing the body to facilitate further thinking. So, in regards to introspection, uh, how does the external environment impact the body, and how does that impact on the body um, influence thoughts, feelings, what have you? Um, so, for example, I had to move out of the city a couple of years ago because it was too much uh, influence, too much external stimuli. Um, so something like that can very much impact your ability to um, parse out your ideas, your thoughts, your feelings. And so, in something like that, I would suspect maybe journaling would take um, take the cake on that, uh, because you might not be able to organically think throughout your day. Whereas, you know, these days I can do that, and so journaling is really not as important to me, or it doesn't serve the same function I suspect it might for other people. Something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think about it because, well, there is I actually made an article on the difference between introspection and self-reflection. I believe that
Oh, okay.
introspection has more to do with looking within, but observing. It's more as an observer versus self-reflection seems to be more of an engagement. So more of a worker within. So it's not just observing from a detached perspective, it's observing and engaging. Uh, so I think, for example, like when I'm meditating, I take that to be an introspective practice because I'm observing the thoughts and I guess I'll just jot them down sometimes if I find them relevant. And that jotting down gives me so much more information about how, like, what's going on within me. It gives me a good snapshot of where I am mentally. And then versus self-reflection, well, the immediate practice would be journaling to me, but I think there might be other forms. It could even be the like me sitting down and talking to myself like verbally, which might sound weird to a lot of people, but I think we do it all the time. But self-reflection would be basically, writing down thoughts, but also engaging with them and questioning them. So it'd be like, why do I think this way? You know, I have this feeling, I have this emotion, I have this little like nudge within me. What is that nudge trying to tell me? And so I direct my attention towards the nudge and I ask it what is going on. And there's often information to be found there. Um, so I think introspection. This is what I think. What I wrote down in the article was that introspection serves its purpose, serves a different purpose than self-reflection. Introspection serves a purpose of kind of like clearing out and understanding where you are from a more detached perspective. And especially with meditation, you want to introspect so that you can basically clear your mind in a way where you're observing and letting go. Versus self-reflection is a much more um, engaged practice. It's more active versus introspection is more passive. So with self-reflection, you're journaling, so you're engaging with yourself. You're speaking to the different aspects of yourself. So I think that I feel like introspection has a more Eastern philosophical um, like is a more Eastern approach versus self-reflection is a more Western approach because you have like the psychologists who talk about looking at your past and like questioning and looking into your trauma, and so that's kind of where psychology came from versus like the Buddhist and um and like those philosophies from the East have more to do with like detachment and observing. Where do you think you would fall in line with those two, or do you feel like you kind of do a synthesis of both also?
Um, well, on its face, it seems like I might be doing a synthesis, or it might be one or the other at any given time. Uh, I guess it really depends on what does meditation mean to any particular individual, and are they taking more of an Eastern yoga approach, or are they taking more of a Western occult approach? And those will manifest differently, and they'll function differently, and they'll serve different purposes. Um, I think that when a lot of people talk about meditation, they're referring to the Eastern yoga in the sense that um, you're kind of clearing your mind. And I do that occasionally. Um, it's interesting to see, like, back when I was working in the slaughterhouse, I would just uh, meditate, essentially, just empty my mind and just kind of observe the environment that I'm in, just to see um, how does each particular environment actually make me feel. If I completely clear my head and I just let the environment kind of have its influence over me, um, it's hard to explain. Like, I remember at one point, again, doing this at the slaughterhouse, and just remember feeling um, something about the lighting was very um, unsettling. And, I had been there for 2 years and it never bothered me. And I just wanted to try it out just to see what would happen. And I remember thinking, this is quite odd. And, if I'm here every day doing this, and subconsciously, I suppose this is making me feel not great, then what might that do over the long run? Um, so I'll do that, at the grocery store, getting gas, driving, um, at a social event of some sort, just in any environment. So I did this basically kind of like where I'm at right now, and I saw some flowers at one point, and I did that, and I was like, wow, like actually flowers do really make me feel something a lot more than I thought they would or could. Um, so that would be like your Eastern yoga. Um, the Western approach, that's my default. Um, the way that I look at it is meditation's not an activity. Meditation is a state of being. And so my goal is to never not be in a meditative state. If something takes me out of my meditative state, I don't like that. And so
Right.
um, something will kind of take me out of it. I'll observe what's taking me out of it, think about why that is, and then try to find ways to work around that particular um, set of circumstances. Um, so I mean that's the way that I look at it. Always trying to limit the space and time uh, between thought and action, or internal process and external manifestation. Um, so I mean that's the whole concept of occult magic is, you know, by all accounts, you are a magician if you can manifest your inner thoughts externally fairly quickly. Something like that. So I'm not sure if that actually answered your question, but that's kind of the way that I look at it.
I would say it seems like you do a little bit of both. I think the fact that it does sound like you're doing both, basically, because at the end of the day, self-reflection is a. I would say maybe have you looked into Jungian psychology where they talk about, for example, shadow work and the practice of active imagination, where there's a conversation between the individual and like the individual consciousness looking within and engaging with various other aspects of the individual. So the shadow, for example, is an aspect. We can look at like the different archetypes that exist within us, like the lover archetype or the magician archetype. Um, these are basically aspects that we all have access to and that influence our decisions. And like you said, the goal is to be in a meditative state so that way you are consciously partaking in what you're doing. But anything that takes you outside of that, it can lead to almost unconscious actions. You know, this is where people get overtaken by emotion, or they do something that isn't in line with their character. It's almost like it comes from another force. So that whole idea is the reason why I push journaling, because journaling becomes a platform for you to be able to engage with the shadow, for example. So it gives that space to dialogue with these different aspects of yourself, because most often people are walking contradictions where they have, one desire but then another desire that takes away from that, like the desire to, for example, quit smoking, and then the desire to not quit, or like to want to stay smoking. Like that's an example, and I just mentioned that because I made a video yesterday, 2 days ago, mentioning that as an example. But yeah, so that idea, and using journaling as a platform, how does that? First off, are you familiar with those concepts of the shadow and the archetypes? And then second, what are your ideas on seeing journaling as a platform to engage with these different aspects of yourself?
Yeah, so I'm fairly familiar with Jung's work. Um, so in undergrad, I actually had to defend his doctoral thesis. Um, and then in grad school, I did a lot of work, um, kind of analyzing themes throughout his early works up until his late works, particularly the Red Book. Um, so, it
Okay.
not even his books, but also um, his seminars, which were then written. Um, so I'm fairly familiar. I thought going into it I would be a lot more interested in Jung's work.
Mhm.
The more I got familiar with Jung as an individual and his body of work, the more I felt it's outdated. Like, why can't we take these ideas and continue on with them?
Mhm.
Just because one guy had an idea doesn't mean that we have to just leave those ideas right where they are. Can't we expand? Can't we develop? In regards to the shadow, um, I suspect personally I might have a sort of inverted shadow. Um, I think that in common discussions, people take the shadow to mean to become a raging asshole, um, and just develop all these dark negative traits that um, I'm not really sure that that's what Jung was really getting at in his discussions of the idea. The shadow, my interpretation of it is simply facets of the personality that have gone underdeveloped or just simply overshadowed by your other traits. I think contextually speaking, in Jung's time, that usually manifested in what we would understand to be darker traits. But
Yeah, the taboo.
yeah, what I'm seeing in today's day and age, in the common person to take these ideas, it just means to be an asshole. But if that's not really who you are, then you're artificially trying to induce something that's not natural to your mode of being. It's not natural to your personality. Um, and so, in regards to myself, uh, I suspect it's a inverted shadow because I'm not really a nice dude. Um, if you bother me, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Um, However, the way that I look at it is instead of so the common idea is look at negative traits, try to associate with them, and try to identify of whether or not it's a projection. Um, so I've seen some people to suggest that you look at something that you don't like and try to figure out how that external thing is actually a part of you that you're trying to suppress. Something like that. Um, that doesn't work for me because I could just accept these things left, right, and center. Instead, I look at positive traits in people. I look at what do I find inspirational? What do I find refreshing? What are the positive traits that I see in other people, or maybe not even a person, maybe something more abstract like an event or a piece of art, and I try to um, identify is something that I find positive. Is it possible that the reason I resonate with it is because it might be present within me somehow, some way? Um, and so it's the same process, the same function, but I think for um, I'm not looking at negative traits. I'm looking at positive traits and trying to implement those positive traits within myself, something like that. So I suspect it's the same thing. It's just two different approaches, or same approach, but different outcomes.
Yeah, I think that hold on. That's actually very well in line with the way I perceive the shadow. Um, I love this topic of the shadow because it gives a framework to work with to develop oneself to his or her fullest potential. Um, so then, well, I mean, my question, because journaling has been an integral part to my integration of my shadow, and there's a lot of good points to go from here. Um, but in terms of journaling, circling back to that, do you see that serving as a way to integrate the shadow? For example, sitting down and you mentioned the positives, like what are some positive traits that I admire in other people that I feel like I could integrate or yeah, put into my life? I think like questions like that, I think those make really great journaling prompts, and it could help accelerate that integration of the shadow.
Um, well, so to specifically respond to the journaling aspect,
Right.
um, I don't know if that would really work for me. I can absolutely see it working for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as we started this conversation, I don't actually know how other people are really handling something like this.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that So on the EcoPunk's reflection, I responded to your reply, and towards the end of it, it helped me kind of contextualize the way that I view these things. So you mentioned a negative perspective, which I absolutely agree. But I think the way that I look at it is I don't necessarily treat a negative thing as a bad thing. It's simply a thing. And as I was writing out the response, I was actively generating an understanding of something that's subconscious to me, but actually articulating it and understanding. I intuitively know the way that I am and how I think about these things and how I feel about them, but to put words to it, uh, also put more life into it. And so it became a little bit less subconscious and a little bit more conscious, I guess. Um, but yeah, I mean that was some pretty dark stuff that I wrote. Um, so it might just be that uh, due to the extreme nature of some of the stuff, uh, that might not come out organically through just raw, pure journaling. It might need to come out through some sort of prompt by another person. It might need to come out through discourse. It might need to come out through active engagement. I would consider writing to other people as active engagement. It's your lowest form of active engagement. Obviously, speaking with another human being, being face to face, like not right now, but like actually face to face, that would probably be your highest form of engagement. But yeah, I suspect that, or it seems reasonably possible that if you have an individual with more complex, more advanced uh, ideas, thoughts, feelings, what have you, particularly like stressful things, or potentially even traumatic. Um, Journaling might be where journaling sort of it can't extend that far. But I don't know. I mean, I uh, journaling's a new concept to me, just overall.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. I think it adds more complexity and nuances to the reasons why one should journal. And I think that it's very interesting because you got that perspective of you I don't think this is like your first time engaging with the journaling prompts themselves and engaging more, intentionally with journaling itself. Um, and so I'm coming at it from, journaling was an integrative part of my practice, and we've got two people here that clearly understand, at least my from like what I understand, of the transformative concepts of the transformative power that introspection and self-reflection have. Um, and so you have your mode, and I have my mode, and it seems like it's kind of worked out for the both of us. I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, this is really good. I wanted to ask. You mentioned something about Jung, where you said, I think we should move away and add more to his work, which I think is true. I kind of want to engage in that for the last 10 minutes, if that's okay, because I think this could be pretty
Totally.
beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So it sounds like you know a good amount. You study a good amount of Jung. I mean, you defended his thesis, and you read his book, the Red Book. What are some things where, because I'll share a few things, which particularly when it comes to Jung's body of work, I don't think I have that much. I don't have that much information on it. Like I didn't read or consume his books. at the level that I would like to. Um, I love his perspective because I could see like his ability to look into the field of psychology during his time and see the holes and the need for a much deeper understanding of the soul. I think he really paved the way for the new age, which is where we're at right now. He was an integral part of that. Um, but I do think that his work was very limited. Especially the way I see it now, even the idea of the shadow. Um, I think that right now there's a lot more information and understanding about consciousness, which has allowed me to kind of expand on the complexity of the shadow. For example, you mentioned the light versus dark almost dynamic, where you can repress the dark side, but you could also repress your light, and so these it, like what people interpret as Jung's work is different than Jung's work itself, right? But
Sure, yeah.
but when we're talking about Jung's work itself, I think that he was going in the right direction and he took it as far as he could given the circumstance. Um, but what are some things for you that, you think now can be added to his understanding or to his body of work that could extend that?
Oh, geez. Um, well, I will start this off by saying that uh, absolutely a lot of his work went completely over my head. Because a lot of his work, it's not really communicating to another person. For example, the Red Book is basically pure archetype. And
Right.
if you don't really associate with the way that Jung's mind worked in the moment of which he wrote things, um, then it's not going to make any sense. It's like decoding pure schizophrenia.
Right.
Um,
Because
which
that's what he had, right? He was at moments, it seems like, schizophrenic.
so I yes, he himself said that during his Red Book period, he was doing a schizophrenia because the concept of schizophrenia was not fully developed at the time. Our understanding today of schizophrenia is not what that word means back then. Um, I can't really speak to the subject of what exactly Jung meant when he
Right.
used the word. Bear in mind that psychology was not actually a field until about 1920, 1925. And so everything that we know and understand about psychology, um, although the field's about 100 years old at this point, a lot of it's only come out in the past 20 years.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
a child right now.
sorry, what was that?
I said psychology right now is like a child in terms of its development.
Yeah. So I don't want to say that Jung's work is completely useless or that it's completely insane. I'm saying
Mhm.
that um, just because I personally did not understand it, doesn't mean that uh, it doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It just means that there's nothing there that I'm either capable of understanding or simply willing to put in the time and effort to understand it. Um, However, where we could go from here, I mean, it seems silly to me that if we have to wait around for the next Carl Jung to show up to continue on, then we're going to be waiting for a very, very long time. However, if we broke down very basic, simple concepts and just sort of fleshed it out. So, for example, Carl Jung came up with the concept of extroversion and introversion. And the common understanding of introversion is somebody who's closed off from the world, they're shy, they're anxious. Uh, I don't think that's actually what Jung's getting at. I think that the idea is that the introvert interfaces with the world through internal processes. So they understand the world through thinking and feeling, whereas an extrovert, in order to achieve that same process, they need to do so through dialogue. And I think that's fundamentally the difference. And so when you bastardize a concept like that, then you really lose a lot of the value it could have. There are probably a lot more introverts than anybody realizes. Um, so, if we adopt an extroverted model, despite the fact that perhaps there's significantly more introverts, then you're really stunting any value or any ability for anybody to benefit. Um, so for example, I have one buddy, he can talk and talk and talk. And I love talking with him. We could be on the phone for 8 hours uninterrupted, but I'm primarily listening. And then when I do have a moment to speak, um, it's because I'm listening and I'm responding. Um, I'm not engaging in a process of synthesis at that point. I'm not engaging in a process of helping me understand something. It's just pure communication at that point. Whereas I think an extrovert, um, that is their learning. Their social interaction is the thinking. It is the learning. Um, so something like that. If you were to develop an idea like that, say for therapy or learning models, um, that could potentially be useful. It's at least worth considering. It's at least worth exploring. At least so I feel. Um, and so it's stuff like that where Jung's kind of the concept of Jung is tainted because the man was insane, essentially. And so if you try to bring that up in a professional context or an academic context, it would be the same idea of like, hey, what if Freud wasn't wrong? What if Freud was actually onto something? You'd be laughed at. It doesn't matter whether or not it's the idea stands on its own. It's the context within itself. Everybody knows Freud to be weird, a pervert. Jung, his ideas are, for all intents and purposes, schizophrenic. And so if you try to bring that up meaningfully in academia, research, therapy, or even in basic spiritual circles, you can't take it too seriously. I think, I find, I
Do you
find that
think?
when you take it,
Well, I was
sorry,
gonna say, do you think that because this came back to because you have experience in beyond like post bachelor
oh
like
yeah,
studies, like you got your master's or was it your doctorates?
masters,
Masters, right? Yeah. So you have much more experience with the academics than I do. Um, I think this points to a problem, which is that I think that what people often do is they work off the interpretation of the work rather than the work itself. Because the difference between the interpretation of the work and the work itself is that the people who can understand the work itself are the ones who have integrated it into their life. So who have actually experimented with the work and who have considered put it under intense scrutiny and question like, okay, this might actually have some validity to it. This might actually have some application to it. Versus the ones who work off just the interpretation itself are the ones who are judging it mostly off the context, the times, the circumstances, um, etc. So like, do you think that a lot of the things that are holding back both academia and just like the world of spirituality in general is that people work more off the interpretation than actually looking at the body of work and experimenting with it? Like, do you think that there's a problem there?
problem. I would be hesitant to say problem. Uh, I think really the question is it working? And if it's simply not working, well, that's not necessarily a problem. It just means that you pivot. Um, so, as an aside, in regards to the archetypes, I used to work in a psych ward for kids, and they really liked stuff like D&D. And at its core, what is D&D? It's fantasy, and what is at the core of fantasy? It's archetypes.
You're talking about Dungeons
And
and Dragons, right?
yeah.
Cool.
I
Yeah.
mean, kids love stories. They love interacting with fantasy, and to them, the world is magic. And
Right.
so now you're introducing them to a fantasy setting where magic is very much real in this uh, hypothetical scenario. And you can see this in adults too that also play D&D. They're interfacing with archetypes that they either view themselves as or archetypes that they would wish to embody and become. Um, you could see this in virtually any work of fiction. And there's something very real to that. Um, why is it that somebody can watch a movie and they become inspired by Star Wars or Star Trek or Lord of the Rings? Anything that is in no way, shape, or form based in reality. Why can they still um, relate to it and benefit from it? Because it's the archetypes themselves. Um, and the archetypes are within real people. So, for example, like the idea of the wizard or the high mage or the priestess, anything, right? Well, don't we have those in real life anyhow? I mean, what is a professor? What is a researcher? Is a researcher not somebody who locks themselves away? They spend a lot of time alone and they're exploring and understanding the world around them, and then they go on to teach others that same stuff. Uh, that to me is essentially the manifestation of a very real something, and it's an archetype, but it's also transcendental of the archetype. It's real. It's an actual thing,
Right.
and then we could see it.
Yeah. So then I think the work that we're gonna sum this up with like within the next 5 minutes because we're already going
Yeah,
over.
yeah.
I think well this is the thing that I want to add because it's kind of veered off topic from journaling, but I think
Yeah,
it's perfect. This kind of went even I really like what the direction we went because I think this is almost like a whole podcast within itself. Like this is really good. But I think that the work that needs to be done well, here's my belief. My belief is that I think that there is a problem in in psychology, for example, and just like the institution itself. I don't think it's I think it's lacking in the understanding of the soul, and it's not until the soul, the conversation of the soul and the existence of the soul is a like dominant fact within psychology. It's not until then that we can actually lead to a much more sustainably transformative field. Um, that's why I say right now it's in its infancy, and the way I think that the way to reform psychology in itself is going to have to be outside of academia because academia, I believe, like yes, there's the tests and everything, but I think like for example, the work that I'm doing is work that will hopefully people can take on and use it to transform their lives, and they will kind of point back to Jung and say, hey, you know what, this guy was actually onto something, we just didn't know what to do with it at the time. That's basically me. That's what I want to bring to the table. um, and I think that the work right now is really you know basically teaching people how to think, which is outside of just interpretation, but more so in terms of application, which is what I'm all about. There's information. It's not about the context, not about the circumstance. It's about can we apply this to our life, and does it work, basically. And that's what I want to push people to do. Outside of like, even, you mentioned like necromancy, for example. Like for me, people hear that word, and often the reason they're pushed off is because the interpretation, like when has that word been used, in what context, etc. And so there's this big judgment, which creates a big wall around that word. But for me, I understand that it's about whether it works or it doesn't work. And if I have no experience with it, then I have to, if you're the one that's using it and you've used it, you've applied it, then I have to be willing to hear how it's worked in your life, so that I can begin to see how I can apply it into my life, and begin to see whether it can be life enhancing and life transformative. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that we are battling as a society, or as like a collective, which is the ability to just think for oneself.
Yeah, so I know you said you wanted to wrap this up, so I'll kind of just rapid fire these 2 points. The way that I've always kind of handled the subject of thinking, because that's been huge as of late over the last 15 or so years. Nobody can think anymore, or people can't think for themselves, and higher education is all about telling people what to think. And so the proposed solution is to teach people not what to think, but how to think. And I think, why not go even further? Start from square zero. Start with what is thinking, right? If somebody doesn't know what thinking is, and they're not actually really thinking, then teaching them how to think isn't really going to be useful, because they don't actually know what thinking is fundamentally to start with. So that would be my response into that topic. Oh, and yeah, and the limitations of psychology. I mean, that's realistically why I got into the occult to begin with. It's not that I started studying psychology and I didn't feel like it was good enough, so I turned to the occult. It's I started from the occult, and to understand it further, I studied psychology. And so, obviously, when you run into the limitations of psychology, well, then you're just right back where you started, but you have more context to it all, and you could flesh out and develop both fields with a synthesis. So I absolutely agree in the regards that there are limitations to both approaches, and if we wanted something holistic, just because something works for somebody doesn't mean it's going to work for other people. But if it works, then you'd figure out why it's working, how it's working, and find a way to import that model, export it from an individual and import it to other people. And that might not necessarily be rigidly scientific. There are non-scientific. There's an entire branch of psychology that's non-scientific psychology, because fundamentally you cannot measure. You can measure electrical activity in the brain. You can't measure thoughts. We can interpret dreams. We could do dream analysis. That does not mean that we can actually see the dreams of other people. By definition, this is not scientific, but it works, and we do it all the time. And it's very real in the sense that it has an impact, it has an outcome, something like that.
Yeah. All right, I love it. Yeah. I'm actually gonna think about this. Might have to even do a video on what is thinking. I think that is a very profound question that it could help really dissolve a lot of this. But also, two books that I would recommend. I don't know if you've checked them out, but looking into Ken Wilber's A Theory of Everything, or A Brief History of Everything, that will encapsulate a lot of what you're saying. I think you'll love that book. I'm pretty sure if you checked it out. And then also the second book, I don't know if you checked out Esoteric Psychology, but if you are an occultist, I think you would really love that book too.
Sure, who's that by?
By Alice Bailey.
Okay.
And you could get that one. You can check that book out for free. It's on the website of Just look up Alice Bailey, The Arcane School, and then Esoteric Psychology.
Esoteric Psychology.
Yeah.
So
And so
the history of everything by Ken Wilber, and
yeah,
Esoteric Psychology by
Alice
Alice
Bailey.
Bailey. Alice
Yeah,
Bailey.
yeah. I'll
Okay.
send you a message on school so you got that.
Yeah,
But
please do.
we'll wrap this up. And I think I really like where this is headed. I think that whenever you feel ready, I think it'd be cool if we did like a podcast episode. I think that'd be sick. But no pressure. I really like
Run me,
conversation.
yeah, run me through the details at some point, because I'm not really joking when I say like I'm a tech illiterate caveman. Um,
Yeah,
I've heard the word podcast. I generally understand what it is. Dude, I don't even know what a blog is. I know it's a word. I know it's a website with writing. I know a podcast is where people talk. Uh,
right.
if you run me through the details, I would at least be willing to consider it. I just don't know enough about the subject matter.
Yeah, I got you, bro. I'll let you know. But yeah, thank you for the call. I think this is gonna be super interesting, and then like I see a lot of good things coming. So
Yeah, I wanted to tell you earlier, but I really appreciate um, all of this. I mean, like, you're really handing me a huge opportunity for me, and I don't really have the words or really even the full fleshed out concept, but gratitude. I really appreciate this. Um, again, I don't have the words to really flesh it out, but
yeah,
yeah, gratitude.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm like pretty grateful too, because like the knowledge that you have and the experience and all of that is like it's a lot. So I'm very grateful to be able to you have this conversation, this kind of conversation, and um I see us doing like a lot of work together, dude. Like that's just how I feel. Like a lot of good work.
Yeah,
Both
I
like
mean,
for like internally for yourself, like figuring things out for like your writing and everything, but externally just creating something new. Because I want to rebuild, I want to build psychology. Like I want to really build it up and further it, further develop it. So that's this conversation really like brought me back to that.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right, bro. Yeah, thank you, man. So I'm gonna read your message because you messaged me. I'm gonna read that, and I'll send you the book that I was talking about, and then I'll send you the info on the podcast. How that will work.
Excellent.
All right, man. Thank you for hopping on, and I'll probably see you Wednesday.
Yes. Wait.
Okay. It's
Is
gonna
that the one
be that's the 12 p.m. At least like that's 12 p.m. my time. It's a group coaching call. It doesn't have to do with the journaling. It's just coaching for. We could probably focus on your writing, how you've been feeling. For to go into just what we discussed around your writing.
Yeah, the 9 o'clock one. So what would that be? 6 o'clock your time? The
Yeah,
9
that's on Thursday.
Yeah, that one might.
It might be too
I'll
late.
try. Yeah,
Yeah,
I could. Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. Like whatever you can. Yeah. All right, man.
All
I'll
right.
see you later.
Peace.
All right, take care.